Why do you experience performance anxiety? And this can be divided into three categories. The first category being psychological vulnerability, the second being specific anxiety conditioning experiences, and the third is a biological basis of anxiety. So let's begin with psychological vulnerability. Psychological vulnerability is all about your personal background and what types of behaviors and perspectives you bring to the stage. For example, if my parents were always expecting perfection when I took the stage, I would get really nervous. Or if they didn't support my career in the arts, I would also get really nervous because if I made a mistake, I would be letting them down. Or the complete opposite, they would overpraise me and I would actually not fully understand what is good. And when I get out to the real world, I would get slammed. Another part of psychological vulnerability are underlying anxiety disorders. For example, general anxiety, social anxiety, depression, specific anxiety, OCD, panic attacks, you name it. So for me, I used to have social anxiety, which means I couldn't even ask for directions to a Starbucks. I couldn't interact with people without getting nervous. Now imagine somebody like me with social anxiety walking out on stage and seeing a bunch of people looking at me. That's going to freak me out exponentially and probably cause me to have even more anxiety when I'm performing. Versus if I didn't have social anxiety, I still might get nervous, but not to that level. So, do you have any anxiety disorders and how does that affect your performance? The next cause is specific anxiety conditioning experiences. This is all about how I learn about the stage. For example, classical conditioning. I go up on stage, I get nervous, I walk off. I go up on stage, I get nervous, I walk off. What am I doing? I'm learning that the stage is a place to get nervous. All right, great. What about observational? Okay, I'm sitting in the audience and I see somebody go up, they perform, they mess up, and they get scolded by their teacher. I'm now learning that if I don't play correctly or if I don't perform correctly, my teacher's going to scold at me. So I get nervous. The last way to learn about the stage is through operant conditioning. And this is one of my favorites because it's so insane. Essentially, I can practice really well, very focused, get to a really high level technically and musically, go out and boost up my confidence, implement a bunch of great audition and performance strategies, walk into the actual audition, play my best, just totally authentically communicating to the audience and moving the judges. It's wonderful. I walk off, and then a week later, I get a rejection letter. All right. I get a rejection letter, that's fine. Okay, so I have another audition coming up, so I prepare well again. In fact, I prepare even better. And I learn the audition strategies on an even deeper level. And I go into that audition, again, powerfully communicate, just totally have them in tears, walk out of the audition, and a week later, I get another rejection letter. What am I learning? I'm learning that even though I'm playing my absolute best and preparing as much as I can, I'm still getting rejected and I'm not good enough. All of a sudden, for that third audition, I walk in there, still doing the preparation, but I feel a lot less confident and I even start to feel a little bit nervous. My muscles start to tense and my heart rate starts to increase. The last cause is our biological basis of anxiety. This begins with our fight or flight response. Our fight or flight response is our defense mechanism towards perceived threat. For example, if a lion is coming at me really fast, my body's going to prepare to either fight it or run away. Now the next question to ask is, why do we as performers who are sitting in an auditorium or concert hall full of people, right, with no lions, why do we trigger our fight or flight response? Well, remember, it's perceived threat. So if we mess up, if we let people down, we could potentially be socially rejected. So there's a social aspect to triggering our fight or flight response. So another aspect of the biological basis of anxiety is something that's often not talked about, which is the faint freeze response. Now, the faint freeze response happens in the parasympathetic versus the fight or flight, which happens in the sympathetic. Now, the faint freeze response are also ways to defend yourself against perceived threat. For example, you see a lion coming at you and you just freeze and pretend like you're an object. Great, so a lion comes at you and then you faint and you pretend to be dead so the lion doesn't eat you. So what does that mean on stage? Well, imagine that you're performing and everything's going really well, and then you have this huge memory mistake. In fact, when you have that memory mistake, you just freeze and you have no idea what's going on In fact, time just stands still. Or you're going along, you're performing nicely, and then you faint, right? You just can't handle the stress. You can't handle the pressure, and then somebody has to come pick you up. Well, while the majority might trigger the fight or flight response, some people out there actually trigger the faint or freeze. So please be aware of that also as a biological basis of anxiety. So that wraps up the basics of performance anxiety. And with this knowledge, you should have the clarity to know which strategies to use. For example, let's start with psychological vulnerability. What sort of perspectives and behaviors are you bringing towards a stage or before the stage that are actually hindering your performance? What types of anxiety disorders do you have, and how do you need to address that? Second, specific anxiety conditioning experiences. How have you in the past learned about what the stage is, and why do you continually learn to trigger your fight, flight response or faint, freeze response on stage when you get nervous? Follow-up question is, how can I relearn about the stage so that it's something positive and helpful when I perform? Lastly, what sort of biological defense mechanism am I triggering when I get nervous? Is it the fight-flight response or the faint-freeze? Thanks for listening. I hope you learned something, and I'll catch you in the next video. If you have any questions, please comment below. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for the latest updates and visit LiberatedPerformer.com if you want to learn more about how to be a great performer.